What's going on, everybody? This is another episode of the Sports Binge with your host, Will Cotchery. Hope all is well wherever you are, and I hope you guys been doing all right this summer so far, enjoying this NFL offseason. You got to use enjoy to, like, with a grain of salt because it's not real football going on. But I hope you guys are making do without regular season ball as of today. So right now, I just want to introduce a new series that I'm doing throughout the course of the next several weeks. It's going to be me ranking the greatest teams in each of the NFL divisions all time. Now, when I say all time, I'm specifically only including or considering the teams from 2002 onward to the present day, and that's so important because in 2002, that's when the NFL realigned the divisions to include the Houston Texans. So instead of like the old formats from the past, we now have 8 divisions with 4 teams in each because of their inclusion during their expansion 2002 season for the Texans. So I just wanted to throw that caveat out there as well. We're only considering all the teams for each division from 2002 all the way up to the current day. Now, just another disclaimer: this is not I didn't use any specific or analytical algorithm to make these lists up. So it's just a top 10 teams from each division history. It's not no specific analytical data that I'm using. I'm just going off mainly just team record for that win-loss record for the regular season, and just going through like the division records and this other disclaimers from there. Because a lot of it is just really just close knit. It's close knit and just splitting hairs because there's so many similar win-loss records for all the teams. So if you just stand out in any particular way, and if you represented the NFC or the AFC in the conference championship, especially going to the Super Bowl, let alone winning it, those tend to get a lot of weight as well. So just like I said, it's just a lot of these teams are what and what. So just want to throw that out there as well. So don't get too emotional. It's just really just something pass the time. Just really the interesting topic that I came up with. So without further ado, here are the top 10 teams for each division's history series. Moving to the NFC West, at number 10 we have the 2008 Arizona Cardinals. They finished the season 9-7, including 6-0, a perfect 6-0 in the NFC West division, before losing the Super Bowl to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Making the playoffs for the first time since 1998, the Arizona Cardinals did just enough to make the playoffs. The points forward that they had that season were 427, and they allowed 426. So just a point differential of +1. So you could say just on paper they just did bare minimum. Offense really carried this team by far. They finished 3rd and 4th in scoring offense and scoring and total offense respectively, whereas the defense placed 28th in scoring defense and 19th in yards allowed respectively. While they did have Edgerrin James at the tail end of his career as a running back after a successful career with the Indianapolis Colts, this team was really carried by the passing offense with late career resurgence of Kurt Warner and budding superstar in the making Larry Fitzgerald, wide receiver, who was already a really good receiver leading up to the 2008 campaign. And of course, they had Anquan Bolden as a second string receiver, and Steve Bresson as a slot guy. But this was when Larry Fitzgerald really started to solidify himself as the best receiver in football. And for the next 3 or 4 years, that would be the case. Losing to New England in a 47-7 blowout fashion game on the road, the team would score at least 30 points in 4 straight games, including the postseason, until they met up with the Pittsburgh Steelers in Super Bowl 43. While they did hold serve toward the last waning moments of the game, after Larry Fitzgerald go-ahead touchdown, Pittsburgh Steelers was able to steal the game after Ben Roethlisberger drove him down on the game-winning drive. Now, this is the team that I wanted to win the Super Bowl. They were like one of the more Cinderella stories throughout the 2000s decade, because I was tired of seeing the Steelers win the Super Bowls in the last several years, but nonetheless, they earned it. They came back in the game, but the Arizona Cardinals still should be applauded for what they did throughout that season, especially in December onward. At number 9, we have the 2003 St. Louis Rams. They finished the year 12-4 and 4-2 in division play before losing the divisional round to the Carolina Panthers, who would eventually represent the conference in Super Bowl 38. Now, this was toward the end of their greatest show on turf era, where well, we could argue that they're the greatest offensive stretch in NFL history for what they had, what they accomplished statistically, and the players they have from Kurt Warner to Marshall Faulk, you name it. The team finished second and ninth in scoring offense and total offense, respectively. Now, the defense was actually middle of the road, 17th and 16th in those respective categories. Now, the defense wasn't at their peak level from 99 and the 2001 campaigns, but they were still respectable enough for the team to finish 12-4. The 447 points the team scored that season were seventh most in franchise history, and the six teams that were better, they either all of them, or five of the six of them, they either won the Super Bowl or lost it in the championship game for the season that year. So that just goes to show you how productive they still were, even at their waning moments of that greatest show on turf era. Unfortunately for the team, they were ousted by a walk-off big play touchdown by Steve Smith in overtime, which was really the last we've seen of their playoff peak, even though they made the division round again despite being 8-8 the following season. The fans could really tell this was toward the end of their peak era of franchise history. At the number 8 spot, we had the 2018 Los Angeles Rams. So, different year, different city. The team finished 13-3, including an undefeated 6-0 record in divisional play before losing this past season Super Bowl to the New England Patriots. After missing the playoffs for 12 straight years, the Rams finally got back to postseason play in 2017, where they lost a wild card round to the Falcons. They took the next step further last season by finishing 13-3, first in the division, and scoring 527 points throughout the 2018 campaign. The team finished second in both scoring and total offense. While the defense was a little worse than the 03 squads, they were still respectable enough in key moments to get them over the hump to get to the Super Bowl. Jared Goff was continuing to progress as an elite, or not just necessarily elite, but just a top-tier quarterback that you could depend upon to bring you the goods and when it matters most. Todd Gurley, one of the best players in football, was an unbelievable season at running back. And to keep in mind, they did all this offensively without Cooper Kupp, who was injured throughout the year. After getting off to an explosive start, especially during that Thursday night game against Minnesota, where they were just all over the place. And then in that epic Monday Night Football showdown against the Kansas City Chiefs, the team sputtered down the stretch offensively, losing tough games to both Chicago and Philadelphia in back-to-back weeks. The team will respond by winning four. After Philadelphia lost, the team will respond by winning four in a row to get to the Super Bowl, where they had a disappointing showing offensively against the Patriots. And this is where their legacy will last. There's been saying that Jared Goff had to look to the sideline to get the plays. He didn't read the defense. Nonetheless, it was not the showing that you would want to see it in the biggest game of your career. Now, there's a lot of controversy about the New Orleans game the 2 weeks prior to that conference title game. Nonetheless, they still won in overtime by the Zerline field goal. So this team is still in contention for multiple Super Bowls to come, depending on how they do with free agents. Despite that, they still have a great core around them, especially on offense. At the 7th spot, we have the 2013 San Francisco 49ers. They finished the year 12-4, including 5-1 against the NFC West before losing to the Seattle Seahawks in heartbreaking fashion in the NFC Conference Championship game. This marked the third consecutive season where the team made it to the third round of the conference playoffs. And this team was still led by their defense and carried by their defense. Even though this was statistically their worst defense of the Jim Harbaugh era in that 3-year stretch, ranking 3rd and 5th in scoring defense and total defense respectively, they still were elite. So it was no question of how dominant they still were, despite the dip in production on paper. And for the third straight season, they finished exactly at the 11th spot in scoring offense. In Colin Kaepernick's first season as the full-time starter, they put forward 406 points total, which is the most in that 3-year stretch of the Jim Harbaugh era, against only 272 points allowed that year. So I come up with a 134-point differential. And their downfall that season was, of course, their arch-rival Seattle Seahawks. After splitting the season series during the regular season, they had an epic showdown in the conference title game, just a slugfest before underthrow by Colin Kaepernick fell into the hands of their linebacker after Richard Sherman had the epic tip to lead to the interception, which iced the game, which was a heartbreaking defeat for them in their own right. At number 6, we have the 2011 San Francisco 49ers. They finished 13-3 and 5-1 in the total season and the division respectively, before losing the conference championship game to the eventual Super Bowl champion New York Giants. Before there was the Seattle's Legion of Boom, this was the 2011 team for the 49ers. They were considered the bullies of the league defensively. After years of great offense with Jerry Rice, Steve Young, Joe Montana, you name it, this was where I saw. This was like the peak of the franchise right here in this upcoming 3-year stretch, where they were really carried by their defense. From Patrick Willis to Navarro Bowman to rookie Aldon Smith, Carlos Rogers, Deshaun Golson, they were unbelievable. Those guys were monsters. The 229 points they surrendered that season were the lowest in that 3-year stretch from 2011 to 2013, and they played second and fourth defensively in the two major defensive categories. But the downside for that team was Kyle Williams and the critical giveaways that he had in that conference title game, which was a dogfight the whole way around. They ended up losing to the Giants at Candlestick Park. At number 6, we had the 2012 49ers, who finished 11-4-1, including 3-2-1 in divisional play. This is where we really started shifting of the guard offensively, where Alex Smith, who was always considered more of the safe guy, the check down guy, the game manager, who was still pretty productive. Once they switched to Colin Kaepernick, the whole dynamic of the offense changed. They were just far more explosive and far more dynamic. And this was really, the 2012 was the year where the read option really came alive in the NFL, with RG3 leading the way in Washington as a rookie. And you just really saw the evolution throughout several teams, especially out west in San Francisco, where Colin Kaepernick uses mobility to cause havoc for defenses. While the defense was still at the top of their game, the offense improved significantly as far as yards per game. They ranking 11th in 2012 as opposed to 26th in 2011, the year before. The only thing that really stopped them that season were the Baltimore Ravens, a team that really had their number in the last 2 years anyway, with older brother John coaching the squad. After falling into a big deficit early in New Orleans in that Super Bowl, they came back, but they still wasn't enough to eclipse the Ravens from getting their franchise's second Super Bowl title. At selection number 4, we have the 2005 Arizona Cardinals, who finished 13-3 for the regular season, including 4-2 in divisional play, before losing in blowout fashion to the Carolina Panthers in the conference championship game. Now, you could really make a strong argument because of their win total, 13 wins, which is the most in franchise history, that this is the greatest team in the history of the Arizona Cardinals, despite not winning the Super Bowl, and despite not being one of the two teams that won a championship in the history of this franchise. But really, this team was the most well-rounded on this list. On paper, offensively, they finished second and first in scoring offense and total offense respectively. And in defense, they finished 7th in scoring defense and 5th in total defense. So well-rounded across the board on paper. They just really had it clicking after. They had a couple good seasons before that, including 2014 where they lost in the wild card at 11-5. And the year before that, they finished 10-6. So this team was just dominant all the way around, scoring 489 points through the season and allowing only 313. And by the way, the 489 points they forwarded that season is a team record. After years of battling mediocre play and injuries, Carson Palmer really came alive as a late resurgent player that season, throwing for 4,671 yards and 35 touchdowns to only 11 interceptions. Really had an unbelievable year, averaging 291, just under 292 passing yards a game. And of course, Larry Fitzgerald was still a productive player on the outsides as well. Even though the franchise had their greatest season on paper in history, unfortunately for them, the Carolina Panthers had their greatest season on paper, who was also just dominant that year on both sides. They smacked them up in Charlotte in the conference championship game. In the number 3 spot, we have the 2005 Seattle Seahawks, who finished the year 13-3, including an unblemished division record, before losing Super Bowl 40 to the Pittsburgh Steelers in Detroit, Michigan. Before they were the Legion of Boom Seahawks, this was by far the greatest team in the history of the franchise. They were just unbelievable on both sides of the field, both sides of the ball, especially led by their MVP running back, Shaun Alexander. Rushing for at least 1,100 yards in each of the previous 4 seasons, Shaun, he just broke the record books with 1,880 yards and a league record 27 touchdowns rushing on the ground that year, averaging 117.5 yards per game. Wow, good night. Even though the rushing touchdown total was broken by LaDainian Tomlinson, another MVP the following year, Shaun Alexander really carried the franchise, even with a solid season from quarterback Matt Hasselbeck, who had arguably his greatest season that season as well. Fullback Max Strong was one of the best in the league, really paving the way for Shaun Alexander to have such a historic season. Defensively, Lofa Tatupu was one of the best, even at that young age of his career. He was one of the best inside backers in football. Jordan Babineau at corner, Michael Bulwer at safety, Marcus Trufant at corner as well. Those guys were really productive on the defensive side of the football. Despite their historic season up to that point, it wasn't enough to usurp the Pittsburgh Steelers in winning the Super Bowl 40. At the 2 spot, we have the 2014 Seattle Seahawks. They finished the year 12-4, including 5-1 against the NFC West. Following their dominant Super Bowl victory over the Denver Broncos, the team were still the odds-on favorite to win the next Super Bowl. So they skated through the year 12-4 until they met the Patriots at Super Bowl 49. Still ranking number 1 in the league in the 2 major defensive categories, the team offensively greatly improved from 17th to 9th as far as total yards is concerned. Now, of course, the legacy with this 2014 squad is like the poor decision by Pete Carroll in the Super Bowl by throwing the ball instead of getting the ball to Marshawn Lynch. Of course, ending up in the hands of Malcolm Butler, who I think made the biggest play in the history of the New England Patriots franchise in that moment. And it's funny because I was at work that day, that Sunday evening, and they had a customer that came in, and he was saying, like, I was asking who won. He said the Patriots. I was like, oh my goodness! And the way he told me, it was crazy. And I came back home and I saw how it played out. It was just unreal just to see the highlight, let alone I can only imagine seeing it in real time. Now I will say this though, looking back, I'll bring it back because he asked me the question: if you on the goal line as a Seattle Seahawks team, what you doing? Giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch or passing it? And my thing is, in that moment, I was thinking if you were going to pass, at least use Marshawn Lynch as a decoy. You can't, but they had him like they split out wide or something. Like he wasn't even in a focal point in the play. Looking back on it, it's like my thing is if you're going to pass, play action, use him as a decoy somehow. But that's just hindsight is 2020. Now, if they would have passed it and made a touchdown, we're not really talking about it that much. But I feel like the smartest play for them would have been to just run the ball with beast mode. And lastly, the number 1 spot is the 2013 Seattle Seahawks with the 13-0 record in the regular season and 4-2 in divisional play. They won Super Bowl 48 in dominant fashion against the Denver Broncos. Now, I've said this on Twitter several times in the past that I consider the 2013 Seattle Seahawks the greatest defense in league history, just off the standpoint of that they were so unique in how they were constructed. Unlike defenses I've seen in the past, or historically speaking, this team was primarily, in my opinion, was headlined by the secondary. Of course, the Legion of Boom, of course, with all pros, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. And they sprinkled in the past, they had Brandon Browner, but for the title team, they had Byron Maxwell. And of course, front 7 play helps, of course, which they were great rotationally speaking. But that defense would not have been the same without that iconic secondary. And for what they accomplished against the greatest offense statistically in the history of the league, in a passing and offensive era, they deserve way more credit. They should deserve serious consideration for the greatest of all time, in my opinion. Now, if you look at the numbers, the numbers support teams like the iconic '85 Chicago Bears, and rightfully so. I mean, they're just that historically special. But if you consider just the era, you consider the quarterbacks they had to play, even in that era, that 3 to 4 year era. I feel like they deserve better as far as this popularity and being revered historically. So that's my list. So I know everybody's gonna have their differing opinions, and I was like, why you didn't put this team on it? But just that's what the comment section's for. That's what the likes for. That's what the subscription is for. You can tell me all what you need to tell me on my YouTube channel. I'm just really eager to see what you guys have to hear. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to all my YouTube videos and my YouTube channel. You guys have a blessed day, and I'll see you in the next video.